Today, I'm very pleased to have a good friend here. Chris Long is a landscape architect, and the reason why I wanted Chris to come and give this lecture is because in your coursework, we have to grapple quite a bit with architecture as well, and also the surrounding and plantings and all that. And I think a lot of you do not know that landscape architecture, it's a completely different form of art altogether. So today we have the pleasure of Chris to share with us some of these insights. So a little bit of background about Chris. Chris has been a practicing landscape architect since 1994, starting out at the Parks and Recreation Department, which is the NParks today, and headed the design team at National Parks Board post-merger till his departure to consulting in the private sector, which is Henning Larsen today. In his work, Chris believes that the three pillars of landscape design are to design for the people, place, and partnership. His people approach in landscape architecture has led him to the use of human-centric, outcome-oriented design thinking methodologies and his creation and invention of the Beanstalk Creative Design Thinking TM tools. His work for the Istana Front Lawn, as well as the redevelopment of the Tanglin Core, Singapore Botanical Gardens, has won him nominations for the President Design Award. In the past 2 years, he led the winning of many public sector projects, including MSC HQ, Bukit Batok Nature Corridor, and Farrer Park Integrated Sports and Recreational Facilities. He was also given direct awards for many private residential projects based on his track records. His built works with Henning Larsen. His built works with Henning Larsen include 15 Holland Hill, just obtained TOP, Avenue South Residence, Mandai Nature Safari Park, West Arrival Note, and Mayor House. And with that, please put your hands together to welcome Chris Long.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for that introduction. And so Kelly has kindly explained the goals of the talk to me this morning. But before I start, I actually very much like to hear from you guys what you may want to hopefully get from this talk that I'm going to be giving later. So is there anyone who would like to volunteer and answer to that question? What do you hope to get out of the talk for personally? Anyone? If not, I'll ask Kelly to nominate.
Jessie, what do you hope to get out of this talk? How about Enrique?
Now that you have heard an introduction and what I do, just think along that lines and see if there's, okay.
Your starting question is quite interesting, like what kills the cat? So, will you be eventually telling us what why the topic is what kills the cat? Because it's not a topic that I was expecting when I come for a lecture concerning landscape architecture.
Okay, that's a very good question. Your names again, sorry?
Julia.
And
Julia.
Julia,
Yes.
okay. So, hello. What kills the cat? You find that a very interesting topic, and so that's, what you're here to find out, why that's a topic. A talk by a landscape architect can be titled like that. Yes, it's a very good question. And actually, I am inviting all of you on an investigative journey to find out actually what kills the cat. And along this journey, you'll probably find that I will, along the way, be introducing what I do. And in a way, what Henning Larsen, what I do, is very linked to this topic of what kills the cat. And that answer is, in a way, an invitation from me to all of you to join me to actually find together. So in fact, it's a question not just for me, but actually for all of us. So maybe just one more person to share what you hope to get out of this talk? Just now, the person that Kelly.
To get a better understanding, because I'm not really educated on this topic.
This topic.
Yeah, the
Does
landscape
anybody
architect.
know this profession at all? Have you come across someone who actually is a landscape architect or saw it in the movies?
Not yet.
Actually, in the history of Hollywood movies, there's only, if I'm not wrong, one protagonist who's ever been a landscape architect. So it's not a very well-known profession. Yeah. Okay, so let's start. What kills the cat? And Julia is curious, and I'm sure many of you are as well. There are actually 7 suspects, 7 of them. Okay, and I've lined them up because I think, as I mentioned earlier, let's start on an investigative journey of which one of these could be the culprit. Which one of these is the murderer, shall we? And I will actually introduce them one by one. And they are supposed to be cats. I know some of them look like more like dogs, and some of them look more like rats, but they are all supposed to be cats, okay? So they are, hello, hi. Okay, and one, or maybe more than one of them might have killed the cat. Let's find out which one, shall we? So what I'll do is I'll introduce them one by one, okay? And they are someone's cat. So I'll also introduce the owner. And some of these owners, you may be able to recognize them. Maybe some of them, you may not. Okay? So we'll start from the youngest to the oldest culprit. Okay, that's the order I've placed them. And the first one is this cat. Do you all know who she is, or the owner? Yes. Would you like to share what you know about Greta?
She's a climate activist and she is, I think, a teenager.
She's a teenage climate activist. May I have your name, please? Krishi. Okay. So if you don't mind, maybe just, I won't be able to remember every name, but before you ask or say something, maybe you can introduce yourself so that I know who's speaking. Okay? Cool. Yes, so she's a Swedish activist, and at a very young, tender age, as a teenager, she actually stood up and said, I want to do something about climate, because she feels that all the adults, they are destroying the planet on which we live, and that if she doesn't do something about it, right, she and her friends will be in danger of inheriting a very sick earth. So what she did actually prompted a global action. So every Friday, since her speech at one of these United Nations Climate Change Conference, initiated this Friday protest by many, many school kids all over the world. So what do you think? Are her concerns real? Do you share what she is thinking of? Do you share it? Who does? Can you raise your hands? Nobody. Who doesn't? Also nobody. Okay. Who doesn't? Show your hand. Okay, nobody. So you all share this, right? And let's look at whether her concerns are really real. And it is in a way then very related to what our office does as well. And in a way, we are asking, we'll be asking the culprit or the suspect a lot of questions, so that in their answers, maybe we can hope to find out what actually kills the cat. Okay? So for example, could it be natural disasters? Let's see. In the 20 years from 1980 to 1999, there were only over 4,000 natural disasters. But in the next 20 years, there were over 7,000. Climate-related disasters jumped 83%, major floods more than doubled, and the number of severe storms risen by 40% globally. So these are real hard data from research done by researchers all over the world. And Asia experienced the highest number of extreme weather events, 3,000 over the period, over the 20-year period, right? So these are hard statistics. And one of the causes of climate change is obviously not just carbon emissions, greenhouse effects, but also the way we live. For example, in very congested, what we call urban heat islands, such as this one in the photo. So at Henning Larsen, right, we design with climate adaptation and measures to address climate change in mind. And one such example is this park that you see right here in Singapore, and in a way also how this company originated here. Atelier Dreisettel was a company that was set up and founded in Germany by Herbert Dreisettel. And in the 90s, two agencies came together and decided to work on what we call the Water Bodies Master Plan. And that was then the Public Utilities Board as well as the National Parks Board. So the Public Utilities Board, in case you don't know, is an agency in Singapore in charge of, you know, the waterways, like draining Singapore. Whenever there's water come down, you know, you need to quickly drain it off and send it to the sea, right? So that is the agency that was in charge. Whereas MParks obviously was in charge of the parks. So these two agencies came together and we did what I would call the Kallang River Master Plan. And PUB also invited many consultants, internationally known consultants, and one of them was Atelier Dreisettel, to come to Singapore to look at whether they could work out a sort of like a water master plan, right? A waterways master plan. And the result of this, among many, many others, is the decision to collaborate on what we call a pilot project. And that project was Bishan Park, which abuts the Kallang River. And while we call it a river, you'll see later on in one of the photographs that it actually is more like a big drain today. And this is the effect of that work. Looks terrible, right? Some people in the media will say, oh, flooding again in Singapore, you know, what mess are the agencies in Singapore doing? But we have other Singaporeans or maybe even residents chiming in social media to say, hey, hang on. This is not an accident. This is not a disaster. This is planned from day one. So the firm Atelier Dreisettel was invited by both the CEOs of PUB as well as MPark to come to Singapore to set up shop to help design this park that can cater for extreme weather event. So what happened was that what used to be a drain like this became a beautiful park, became in a way a natural system. And that is the fundamentals of what Atelier Dreisettel, and then later today rebranded to Henning Larsen, does in its core. We use ecosystem functions to design our greenery, to design our landscape. So our landscape don't just look good, they work very hard for us. In this case, in actually slowing down the flow of water downstream, because in the past, drains were designed to make sure that water flows as quickly as possible downstream. But today we know that if that happens, you are just pushing the problem from upstream to downstream, and that's why Orchard Road will then flood. So by catering and slowing down the process, we can actually alleviate flooding issues island-wide. And you can see, therefore, the differences in the approach between a very engineering and the very landscape approach. The one that works with nature, works for nature. And today, it is, you will see videos on YouTube, please go and Google, of wildlife in Bishan Park, attracted by the nature that we've built here, and people are able to come down all the way to the stream when it is dry weather. This is no small feat. Imagine if the two agencies had wanted to draw very clear lines between their responsibilities. Imagine if the agencies had been afraid of what if, for example, what if someone gets drowned because the storm suddenly comes? And then instead of this small little stream, it becomes what you saw earlier. Wouldn't people get drowned? why should I be then responsible for something like that that can happen? If something like that happened, there are two agencies now involved, right? Because this natural water body is now also acting as a drain. So PUB is in charge of the drainage, but NParks is in charge of the parks. Wouldn't they then say, okay, then your problem is not mine, my problem is not yours? So the way that we were looking at this in those days, when I was in a way the client of Atelier Dreisaitl, we were very daring in looking at the delineation of boundaries, whereby instead of, as in the past, the drain is on one side, the park is on the other, we now merge the two together. And so it's not just the design itself that's important, but the thinking behind what needs to happen to realize the design. And in this case, it is the day-to-day, the maintenance of the drain, the maintenance of the park, and also addressing safety concerns on a day-to-day basis. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand and interrupt. So these images really doesn't require much explanation. It just illustrates the value of what we have done. But we don't just do it for the natural environment or a seemingly natural environment. We can also put nature into buildings. And that is the case with Kampong Admiralty. For the residents, because if you don't know, Kampong Admiralty is an integrated development. It means that it is a building or a set of buildings that serve multiple purposes. Among them, there's a clinic here, there's a hawker center, there's also, childcare, etc. But on top of these, there are also residents living in there. And we thought, how nice if these residents can, have a view of nature, and that this nature is actually built on the building itself. But this is what I was sharing just now about the multifunctional building spaces. And you can see that even below, there's also like things like bus interchanges and so on and so forth. And that greenery that you see draped over the building is not just only nice to look at, but as mentioned, our office is always about how the nature can also do work. And in this case, again, it is related to climate adaptation. So this is a view from one of the residential units, which we were invited to visit after we completed the project. And that's the greenery that you see on the diagram just now. This is a photograph of the clinic. And you can begin to see already glimpses of what I'm going to talk about, which is the nature systems being addressed. This is a view. Another one. During construction, 12 months later, functional spaces for the different users, including the plaza. And then here, we use the greenery on the building to slow down the water, just as I mentioned earlier, but also to use the plants to do what we call cleaning of the water. And then when we collect the clean water, it also goes back to the nature to irrigate it. So there is a term what we call passive and active irrigation. Passive means we use rainwater. So the process of slowing it down helps to also retain the water for the plants. So it's really, in a way, like very efficient. But after we collect the water, we also send it back during dry weather for what we call active irrigation. And so this is the system of the diagram of the system overlaid onto the cross-section that you saw just now. And these are the various features: rain gardens, chains to conduct the water flow, as well as eco ponds and so on. So these are some of the videos of the various landscape components doing their work. So we come to the next suspect. The owner of this cat, most likely you all may not know. Anyone know Simona Biles? You know? Oh wow. Okay, could you share who she is?
She's one of the most accomplished American gymnasts, female gymnast.
Very correct. Thanks, Julia. So, one of the most decorated American gymnasts in the world. But there's one unique thing that happened in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. She froze. And this freezing of hers is known as the twisties. It was widely published. Actually, I also failed to mention just now, I think you might have seen it. Greta Thunberg is also actually an autism activist, right? She found purpose through her work in climate activism, but one of the driver was actually also her own illness. And in this case, Simone Biles, what she experienced became very famous and alerted people to this condition. It is a sudden loss of a gymnast's ability to maintain body control during aerial movements. The gymnast feels something akin to an out-of-body experience in mid-air. And this can be very dangerous because when you are in mid-air and then suddenly, for example, you fail to realize where the ground is, you may then just fall and hurt yourself. So this feeling of space is something that we take for granted, isn't it? But just as in the case of a gymnast who can experience twisties during her routine, could it be that we may sometimes also lose our sense of space? And you may have heard of relatives or friends who actually encountered that issue or problem, isn't it? So we take it for granted, but actually space is something that is really difficult to understand and grasp. And I think this is where this topic will kind of bring us together, because you as interior designers, as well as I as a landscape architect, deals with space. But do we really understand space? Do we know how we feel it? In one of my writing, I was trying to figure out how to describe, and my protagonist happened to be a gymnast, to describe how this person, this protagonist can feel and sense space. I couldn't find a verb. Couldn't find. And you know, when you couldn't find a verb, it says something about how we actually relate with space. It means that as a culture, right, this sense of space doesn't seem to be very important, you know. Because you know Eskimos, this is very famous, right, that they have like 99 words for water. It shows their relationship with their environment. And when I was writing and trying to figure out what verb to use, in the end I chose the word taste. He could taste the space. But, you know, it just shows how we don't really understand space so well. That's why you as designers have that role, that very special role, right, to kind of make space come alive for your users. And you may have seen this photograph of a palm tree in the Singapore Botanic Gardens Palm Valley, and how the moment you have a tree, the space somehow just seems to rotate around it, isn't it? So when you place an element in space, you influence the way it is experienced. So these are known as point elements, okay? The previous one, when a point is extended vertically, it is also known as a vertical linear element. And if you want to find out more about the ABCs of space, there is this wonderful book by Francis D.K. Chung, who will explain all this theory behind, so that you can start to pick up more vocabularies of space and the sense of space, and be able to therefore also become more aware and therefore become better designers. So we form delightful spaces. With or without flowers, I will come to it later because there's a topic on that as well. But this topic here now is all about space. This development is Mayor House. Mayor House is at Mayor Road, it's in the East Coast, and it sits between the high-rise and the low-rise. Okay? If you guys know, there is the sea, then there's the East Coast Park, then there's a lot of high-rises, right? But immediately after the high-rises are low-rises. So this is one of the very few places in Singapore where if you stay in one of the high-rises, right, you enjoy unblocked view, both front and back, because at the back are all these low-rises. So this is a low-rise development. And it is a very unique development. Woha is the architect. And they found in URA's regulations, right, this interesting rule that allows them to suddenly, in this development, put a lot of lift lobbies, GFA free. So, what is unique about this development is that every unit has its own private lift. Okay, one of you may say, huh, what's so special? My apartment also have private lift. Okay, that's the difference, huh? The difference is what you may have, because I know this is the one and only one, at least up to now. So there couldn't be another one. So if you have a private lift, it probably means that you have a private lift lobby. So your neighbors below, and your neighbors below, and so on and so forth, and also maybe on top, share the same lift, but you have your own private lift lobby. In this case, the lift serves only one and only unit. So this is the way to therefore enter the landscape, or from the landscape to enter the block, is via what we call the lower ground. So we don't call it the basement because of this. We call it the lower ground. And that's the only way you can go into your, no more pointer. Okay, I'll just, so you can see the arrows, the blue arrows. The lower ground is the way to enter your apartment. And the lift lobby below also belongs to you if you were to buy this apartment. So you enter the lift lobby at the lower ground and then you go to your apartment. So it means that the units are actually staggered, meaning that the highest floor has the biggest floor plate because it doesn't have the other lift lobbies. Lift shafts. Understand? Okay? So we felt that this is a very important thing we need to react to in our design. We were asked to compete for this job. It wasn't a direct award. This was we don't know the client then, it's UOL and King Leong, and this is the first project for us. So she said, okay, can we test you out? Can you like compete with salad dressing? So we did, and this was our submission, one of the perspectives. We illustrate how we understood that the experience of these living here will be very different, and that the lower ground is not just a basement. Not only that, right, we also want to show our thoughts behind how we create the garden spaces. So because of this arrangement, all the ground floor units are the only units and only apartments that has direct access to the garden. Correct? That, remember, because all the rest have to go through the lower ground. We have a special experience for that as well. But for the ground floor units, we find that it's very precious. So we wanted to design the garden space that react to that. So the region very close to all these units were very special. We wanted to create what we call outdoor rooms. And we also understand that where the living room is, they may be less private, and where the bedrooms are, they may need to be more private. So in the way we craft out all these spaces using different horticultural elements, we start to make the areas directly in front of the bedrooms more intimate than the areas that is in front of the living rooms. So all the green walls, and I'll show you later what I mean by green walls, are close. They are made by actually these hedges. If you see, you can almost tell where are the bedrooms and where are the living rooms just by looking at the way we place the so-called green walls, right? Living room, bedrooms. So the garden space is more intimate, and they will feel more protected from other residents who are using the landscape facilities by the way we arrange this landscape. So this is even more clearer now, right? You can see how the outdoor rooms actually responded to the indoor rooms. And this is then the final outcome. And not only is there that relationship between the garden space within the condominium and the units, but also there is a what I call self-repeated relationship. And this is a term, self-repetition, that I'll be sharing a little bit later on as well, in the sense of how the building itself relate to the park that is just beside. Okay? So now you see the green walls. They are formed by hedges in the landscape. And you can also tell now where probably from that photo where the living room is versus where the master rooms and bedrooms are. And also that juxtaposition between the green walls and the other greeneries is quite clear in this photograph. So I mentioned earlier, right, but for not just for the ground floor units, we designed something special, but we wanted to design something special for all those people when they want to experience the garden. So they take their lift, they go to the lower level, right, and then they come out to the garden space on top. And the garden space on top, if you were to describe it using an adjective, what adjective would you choose? Either that or maybe a style. Anyone want to say, yeah, let's go back. What do you think this reminds you of? Is it very tropical or not so? Who thinks it's tropical? Who thinks it looks more like a garden in Europe? All right. So yes, so we have designed something that looks actually very different, correct, from your usual landscape in Singapore, and it has a bit of that European taste, and it's almost like, you know, the other different part of the world, isn't it? Right? If you look at the globe, and you know, most of the temperate countries like America and Europe actually is at the other part. So we thought, okay, how interesting if we devise something that can connect the two worlds. And you see basement, right, or lower level, there's very little light. Do you know naturally where is this condition of very little light? At the forest floor, isn't it? So a lot of tropical plants are shade loving. So we couldn't do a very different garden below. It can be very tropical, but we thought that this could then become also sort of like a narrative, because you come down to the low ground, it's very tropical, and then you walk up these steps, almost like through a tunnel, through Earth, and then you pop up in Europe somewhere or in America. So next is this cat that belongs to this person called Edward O. Wilson. Again, not sure if anybody knows Mr. Edward O. Wilson. Anyone here on this side knows Edward O. Wilson and what he's famous for? Okay, I'll introduce him. An American, oh, how did that happen? An American biologist, naturalist, ecologist, and entomologist. Actually, he studies, you can see his tie, right? Can you tell what is it? Yes, it's an ant, right? So he actually studies ants. And one of the reasons is actually when he was young, during a fishing accident, he blinded himself in one eye. So he doesn't have what we call stereoscopic vision. Because of that, he can see details very well, but he cannot observe birds and other creatures that are far away. And because of that, he became an expert in all these smaller creatures, like the insects, and his favorite is the ants. And he wrote a lot of books. He's a very prolific writer, and he's a 2-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize. And he's the author of Biophilia. Okay, who knows what biophilia is? What is biophilia? Actually, yep, these are videos.
Very few insects are more detested than the cockroach.
Okay, I think, yeah, when I discovered that my apartment actually has a chute outside. Actually, everyone has its own chute, but I discovered that, my apartment has a chute outside. Do you know what I did during my renovation? I immediately sealed up my chute because, like you, I'm very afraid of cockroaches. So, biophilia is about the love of nature, isn't it? But do you love cockroaches? Do you love cockroaches? You don't, right? But isn't cockroach also nature? So is biophilia very false, very wrong, very faulted? Anyone? Right. So let's try to then understand actually what this book that he wrote, Biophilia, is about. Okay? Actually, it's about how he believes that we are part of nature, right? Not apart from nature. We are part of it. And in fact, okay, let's not talk about the difference between creationists and evolutionists. We will talk about that if you want after the talk. But let's just say that the theory of evolution is correct, okay? And that it only just describes how God or gods created the world, right? I think one famous religious person mentioned before, there's no conflicts between science and religion because science describes how God works, but religion explains to you or teaches you how to be close to God. That's the difference, right? So let's not talk about the differences, but just assume that evolution is correct and scientifically proven. And so if we believe in that, we are the product of millions of years of evolution. So we don't really know how our reaction to things, right, is actually written in our genes, isn't it? Right? So the fear of cockroach or the love of beautiful flowers, could it all be written inside us? And actually that in itself is the essence of biophilia. It's not saying that whether you love or hate nature. Okay? And the interesting thing about his book, actually, he also spent a lot of time not just talking about science, but actually about art. And this term biophilia became very popular and better known and probably acquired this new definition that we have just described earlier in 1984 after the publish of this book. And it also influenced the way we design. And I'd like to say that also, therefore, it is not just about animals and plants, but that space is actually also part of nature. The way we respond to space is part of nature. Yeah? And so at Henning Larsen, right, we form narratives of our spaces, and we use nature to create unique experiences. This is Mandai. You may have visited the latest bird paradise, which is actually our master plan. And the West, not only did we do the master plan and the design, but we also followed through in its construction. And so I saw it. Oops. Just now, then. Okay, let me just restart. No, it's okay. I'll just point. Yeah. It's just that my shadow is there in there when I point. So this is the way coming into Mandai from the Mandai Road, and that west node is the one of two so-called public areas that delivers you then to all the different attractions, like the bird paradise, the zoo, etc. Yeah. And this is how we designed it to look like. I didn't actually have any photographs, I think. Am I late or slow? Okay, and this is the Mandai Resort, where we also kind of like flip around, you know, like the idea of the zoo is like you go there and look at animals, right? But the Mandai Resort is where you have, it's a hospitality project, right? So you go there and you stay. And we thought how nice if this one we turn it around, instead of you looking at animals, the animals will look at you. Yeah. So, curiosity mathematics. This is John Nash. Okay, again, who knows who this is? I mean, who the cat's owner is? John Nash. Anybody know John Nash? There are many Hollywood movies made after this person. Okay, he is a Nobel laureate. He's an American mathematician. And the movie The Beautiful Mind is actually his story, and it's a very beautiful story. He's famous for example, for having been a student of Einstein. And when he was at Princeton, right, he will think of a lot of things. And then whenever he has a new idea, he'll run to Einstein. And he'll share that idea with Einstein, who will then engage with him and talk about his idea. But usually at the end of that session, he would tell John Nash that, oh, by the way, you know, this and this idea that we just discussed, maybe you want to read this and this book by this and this mathematician. So he's a very curious person, right? He likes to learn by thinking rather than by reading somebody else's work. And in a way, that story also shows his brilliance, because he can actually think of stuff that other great mathematicians before him has already thought about. And the prisoner's dilemma is an interesting it's based on his theory, okay, which is game theory. And it's about how, for example, when you have, let's say the two of you gonna jail. So I put you in separate rooms, right? And then I'll come and ask you, you know, spill on him, and then I'll give you only 1 year. Or spill on her, and I'll only give you 1 year. Right? If not, you're gonna 3 years for sure, I guarantee you. You've seen that in movies, isn't it? Right? So that's actually the so-called psychological game that shows the different scenarios, how people will actually react, and how people, after you play more and more, you start to actually become more collaborative. Because you start, you know, it's sort of like you start losing a lot. You keep getting the 3 year, 3 year, 3 year instead of the 1 year. So in the end, you say, better not spill. Because then, you know why? Because when you don't spill, you get how many years? If you spill, you get 1, but if you don't spill, you get 3. But actually, if both don't spill, both got scot-free, 0. You got it? So that's actually the theory behind. Okay, if you're interested, you can Google the prisoner's dilemma. Right? But actually, embedded in that story is also this, because I do run this game with my team members, the idea is that collaboration always wins. Okay, we are in a field where collaboration always wins. Okay, if you think selfish, you think I just want to do my part well, I don't care, the architect can fail, you know, or the interior designer in this case, and then in your case, you say the landscape architect can fail, then the product won't be as good. Yeah. Okay, but my interest in mathematics is in what I would call order. And it's very related to the earlier topic, biophilia. Because remember I said that the love of nature, the way we react and respond to our environment, is not just about birds and bees and plants and flowers, but also about space in general. And within space, there's this thing that is called order. And there's this branch of mathematics called fractal geometry that studies order in nature. And these are some of the examples of using mathematical formulas to generate, you can see very interesting, almost sometimes nature-like diagrams and graphics. And the reason why is because actually mathematics as a language is an expression of truths in a way. When a formula or when a theory holds truth, it's because it's true in this world, right? Maybe not in another world, but in this world. So when that happens, I'll skip this one, you will realize that there is a certain expression of geometry that sometimes just speak louder to you, such as, for example, the arrangements of these rocks in this garden in Japan called Ryoanji. More diagrams. Some fundamentals of the mathematics. This is from another talk, so I'll just skip. But one way to explain fractal geometry is through this. For example, if you have a line and you divide it into 3 parts like that, and then you join the middle like that, and then you continue doing it on each of these lines. Right, whenever you get a line, you take the middle and then you redo that. So this is what this diagram is actually showing. That is sort of like the formula behind, okay? So this is interesting because they started to look at using this to then measure, for example, the coastline. So if I ask you, how long is Singapore's coastline in its original state, not in its built state, in its original state? Do you know the answer? What is the coastal length of Singapore? Okay, why do I make a differentiation between its original state and versus after the built state? You see, if you look at these, right, can you imagine it going on forever and forever and forever? And that's the funny thing. If you look at a coastline and then you start looking at it, can I zoom in a little bit more? Then you start seeing smaller and smaller things, right? Then you realize actually there's no smallest you can ever reach. It will go on forever. So in a very interesting way, the answer to this therefore is the coast length of Singapore is actually infinite. And that's a very disturbing answer. Because it just isn't logical, isn't it? Because if you walk it, you know that, oh, hello, I will spend not more than a day walking it, right? But it's actually infinite. So this is something that is very interesting. It shows us again how little we know about our world, isn't it? So what do you think this is? We call this fractal dust. It's in a way a very similar also fractal geometry, and it's a description about things that can be distributed in space. And true enough, actually this diagram came from a mapping of animals found in one of our projects. Right, just by different species, which of course simplified to illustrate the point. But the way elements are arranged in the environment, we used to think that it's just chaotic, it's just random. But today the mathematics is telling us that random is actually a bigger order than non-randomness. In other words, it's actually the bigger subset. You can also arrange squares in this boundary in a very symmetrical way, isn't it? You can start drawing diamonds, right? Series of diamonds, right? Or you can draw a cross, symmetrical. But do you realize that that is just one of many ways you can arrange patterns on this grid? The answer is yes. And so you realize that randomness is actually just a different order than symmetry. They are not opposites. And that Ryoanji garden that I just showed you a photograph of, if we were to try to find out whether it is actually, whether there's a certain order in the way the stones are placed, I came to a very interesting discovery. This is not a quote from anybody else, this is my own research. I found that actually, if you divide that garden space 5 by 5, you will find that the stone arrangements actually kind of align. Because randomness is about probability, whether or not there's an event or whether there's not. So in all those grids where you have no stones, it's just somehow the force of nature never reached there. So there's no rocks. But of course the garden was a man-made work. But so what I'm saying therefore is that could this monk who has arranged the rocks actually try to emulate the way nature arranges things? And if so, right, can it be proven through mathematics? And my hypothesis is actually yes, it can. And the fractal dimension is 1:5 in this case. You see that there's only 5 grids where there are rocks out of 25. 1/5 probability. And then within each grid again, of course, probably is not a sure thing, right? So you cannot have 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, but it ranges from 3 to maybe 7 to 8 rocks, okay? So can we use this in our design? Yes, we can. And today we have computers to help us do this thing. So this is the bird paradise. If you come in here from the upper plaza, there's a way that links to the central plaza. And for this central plaza area in the bird park, we designed the stone arrangements on the flooring being inspired by nature. We wanted to, because it's an attraction about birds, right? So we decided to use the ideas of birds and the way they fly and how they fly in a group. You may have seen movies or documentaries of this when they start doing patterns in the sky. It's very, very interesting. So we were inspired by this, and this is our initial study. And then we use actually the computer to then generate fractal geometries like this. And the end result is a paving pattern that is like that. We actually managed to realize quite close. If you go to the bird park today, please take a look. So, Mr. Holtham's cat wanted to talk about his owner, Curiosity Botanic. Of course, that's part of what I do. So Richard Eric Holtham is an English botanist. Came to Singapore when Singapore was a crown colony and was then the director of the Singapore Botanic Gardens. His seminal work is Gardening at the Lowlands of the Malays, and it's the one book that influenced me quite a lot. And in Henning Larsen, we have this book called the Plant Scrapbook, and what we try to do is, if there's a photograph of a garden that you like, would you be able to use tropical plants to create that look? So that's the exercise of this scrapbook. So I'd like to introduce you guys to this. So people will collect different photographs of gardens they like, and then we will think of, so what local plants can actually achieve that look. This is a local project. So we also use it maybe to ID plants. Not the local one. And amongst all these, there is a few, one that I actually used to, I actually realized this for the CEO of Singapore Land for his personal house, using these plants. And so this is the work we do. I won't belabor the points because I don't think it's what you need to learn. But knowledge of the plants, I think, is very, very important so that you can create the look. Because it's not just about picking the plants, right? The plant scrapbook may look easy, but will the plant survive where you put it, right? You can't, it's not the non-living things. It needs to grow and flourish. So these are some of the studies in terms of, visual connectivity, right? How can we use plants to screen, to make spaces? So, and when I was explaining about the walls, but actually our environment is not always made out of walls. So when you are designing your interior spaces, right, apart from the walls, what are you using to create the space is a question that you can ask yourself, just as we, as landscape architects, ask, how can we use plants to make space? Okay, this is Leonardo da Vinci's cat. I think the owner doesn't need much introduction. An Italian artist, but after his passing, people discovered that he's not just an artist, but is in truth a polymath, which is meaning a person who is actually able to do a lot of different things, amongst which is his innovations and engineering. So what I would like to say about him is he's what we call, and then it kind of like comes back to the topic of the day, which is curiosities, right? Which curiosity actually kills the cat. And yeah, this person is, I just can relate to him for his what we call unquenchable curiosity. And so arising from my own search, right, I think Kelly also mentioned before, I find that being a landscape architect, yes, is there a question? No. I have to work with a lot of different people. But these different people sometimes do not really understand how design works or how designers work. So I started using a series of questions to invite them to think together. And that's what I call the design thinking rule. Design thinking is a term that I didn't coin myself. It's coined by Tim Brown, isn't it? The CEO of IDEO office. If you don't know who this, what this office is, they are the inventor of the mouse. Okay, they work together with Apple, Steve Jobs, to invent the mouse. Okay, but of course they invent many, many different things as well. So they are inventors, they are innovators, and they coined this term design thinking to describe the way they work, which I also resonate with. So one of the core principles of design thinking is that design is not linear. But it's very difficult for humans, especially when you are working in a group, to think in a non-linear way. Because when you want to be creative, for example, a person may want to ask you to be, hey, realistic. Haven't you experienced before you go to your parent and say, hey, mom, dad, I want to do this. Huh? A boy or girl? You sure not? This one very hard to make money one leh. Okay, this is what we call actually in the sixth thinking hat. I don't know whether you've heard of it before. Edward de Bono sixth thinking hat. Putting on the black hat, being critical. Is it an important thinking process? Very important. Why is it important? Because if you don't, your design cannot be. You were shaking your head, right? If you're not realistic, what happens to your design?
It's not viable.
Exactly. And yeah, you know, artists can do whatever they want, but interior designers and landscape architects cannot. People need to live in those spaces that you create for them. So we have to be realistic. But if you are realistic too early, what happens? Then you go to your client and they say, yeah, I've seen this before, leh. Like my house, like my friend's house, leh. Don't want, can you give me something unique? And I said, like that also cannot. Like that also cannot. But if you understand the design thinking process, then you realize that there's a time for everything. There's a phrase in Bible, right? There's a season for everything. That's what it means. That's what it means. So, to briefly describe it, there's two major phases, okay? In every stage, you can pin your finger down to which phase are you in. It's either one of these, divergence or convergence. Divergence is when you want to invite people to contribute. Anything goes. And this is when you don't want to put on the black hat, don't want to be critical, don't want to be realistic, right? In Chinese, we call 天马行空. Let the brain go. But when you are in the convergence phase, rein in the horses. This is when you want to be realistic. So if you find yourself fighting, if you are in a group, and if there's anything you don't remember from this talk, I would like you to remember this one, because you can move you guys along just by asking, okay, guys, pause, let's not fight. Are we in convergence or divergence? The moment you have the answer to the question, you can move on. Yeah? So if there's nothing else you remember of this talk, this one you must remember. because it's critical to collaboration. And yeah, actually, so the different tools actually also falls into different stages, but I wouldn't describe them. But they are based on you all know this story? Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, if you're curious, you can come to me later. I'll explain to you actually what these different tools means by the different characters in the story. But one important lesson, why we need divergence, is because it is a numbers game after all, in innovation. When clients ask you for alternatives and ask you for options, don't go, you should actually start with that in the first place. When I was attending one of Woha's presentation to the client, I was dumbfounded. They did a massing study. It wasn't just one PowerPoint slide. He just click, 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 click. He said, we did so many lah. Okay, it was really a lot. Just massing study, you know. Huh? Okay, so everything starts with a point. But actually a point is nothing. I'll come to that in the next topic. And that is the seventh and the last. A point is nothing. What is nothing? Maybe we should explore it now. Why do I say a point is nothing? How many dimension is there to a cube? 6 faces, isn't it? So how many dimensions? 3. How many dimensions are there to a line? A line. Actually, a line is 1. I wanted to ask first, of course, a plane, a square. How many dimensions is a square? 2. 1. Now you guess, how many dimensions is a point? If a line is already 1, multi or none. So that's where you find interesting. 0 and infinite may be the same thing. Okay, I'm going too much already into things I shouldn't. Okay, so, but I played this interesting evolutionary game in terms of the creation of dots. So let's say a dot can reproduce itself. But two dots can never occupy the same space. Just as how environment will select, right? If the resources are limited, just as space is limited, then just like 2 dots cannot occupy the same space, you know, some creatures will have to die off. Okay? You will realize that, you know, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes so on and so on. It's not always the case. You don't just multiply, because sometimes when these could have, you know, gone here, but then only one of them can reproduce, so to say, right into that space. So you will also realize that some actually goes extinct. Do you see that? This one have gone extinct. Okay? Richard Dawkins says, descendants are many, ancestors are few, or actually ancestors are few, descendants are, I think, whichever. But that's the meaning. Things get extinct. And so you can actually count after how many iterations, right? How many individuals that one individual can procreate. And wow, it's a huge figure, 96. But I also count if space is unlimited, how many could have been? Then the comparison is, the 96 is almost like nothing. You see now? So what does that tell? It tells about ideas. It tells about why clients ask for alternatives. The ideal office has a 10-person studio that develop games. They have 1,000 plus ideas, but only per year, but 40 or 50 of them will be further developed into concepts. And only 6 to 10 inventions are licensed. And these are games, by the way, things you play, right? And out of these, maybe only one is or none is what we call top seller. So the moral of the story is it's going to be a tough life, guys. You get what I'm saying? To land on that winning idea is worse than 4D Maybe not worse than Toto lah, but okay, kidding. So what I'm trying to say is just that you need to try. If you just think that I can just come up with one idea and be an overnight success, I would say, I'm sorry, you didn't think correctly. Okay, you have to work hard. So that brings me to the last topic of today, introduced by this person's cat, curiosity philosophy. Lao Tzu's pet. So I've done nothing in my life as a profession except being a landscape architect. So this is what they will call a specialist. But actually, through going into specifics, through being very expert at something, you can actually sometimes draw certain conclusions about very general things. Okay, so this is my take, and I'll introduce Lao Tzu. Who is Lao Tzu? Who doesn't know who is Lao Tzu? Okay, because he's Chinese. Okay, he's a Chinese philosopher, and some researchers even go to the extent to say that he may not have existed at all. Right? That there's no such person, unlike Confucian, who everybody knows, Kongzi, Confucian, everybody knows for a fact he lived and walked this earth. But Lao Tzu, some people say he may not have lived. So it is the oldest, one of the oldest musings, Chinese musings about life and how life came to be and what it is. And you may have heard of the phrase Tao. So the religion Taoism, for example, came from this word Tao, and it's actually based on his teachings. And Tao is about this thing. It started like this. In the beginning, there was just a void of nothing, which is in a way proven by today's physics, isn't it? Right? Anybody knows about this theory? Right? Today's physics kind of say that, actually all the somethings we know come from nothing. So in the beginning, there was just a void of nothing, and from nothing came the something. The source of something is nothing, and hence that is the way of Tao. So what is it trying to say? Actually, it's also in a way talking about process, about evolution. So nothing is the origin of Tao, something is the effect of Tao. And I think as designer, we experience the same. Okay? We experience creation, isn't it? When you're given a blank piece of paper by Kelly, for example, you are actually being asked to put something onto nothing. And I've explained about the evolutionary process, right? I've explained about how the numbers game is very linked to evolution, right? Meaning to say that, the creatures we see today is because millions and trillions and gazillions of other creatures have died and gone extinct, right? So, and it's just like the way we actually try to design. Okay? And in that sense, I kind of sometimes see that relationship. If there's only one creature on earth that creates the way we do, and it's human. No other beings or creatures can actually execute what we call the design process or the design thinking process. And so when the Bible says, for example, and by the way, I'm not a Christian, so that this is very, very clear. Otherwise you'll start thinking that I'm like trying to preach. No, I'm not. So but that's why I talk about Tao, right? Okay. And so when the Bible says that God created man in his image, I have my own personal belief that that image is not a physical image, but is the creationist mind. It's the way we think. And you as designers will have the privilege to taste what it is like. Okay? So with this last lady here, I would like to then bring the topic back to the first, Greta, because, it kind of started in a very pessimistic way, right? And And you know, sometimes Greta, for example, doesn't think that you can do anything else except be actively protesting against, you know, the way things are going on in the world. But we sometimes will ask ourselves as landscape architects tough questions that when I'm building all these beautiful condominiums for people to live in, yeah, I say I make use of ecosystems, right? But am I really doing more harm or less? Am I really creating to the problem, or am I actually solving it? So is industry the opposite of, for example, environmentalism? So I find that this lady kind of has actually a very good answer to that question about it is not just so easy to say.
I have great.
So the name of the lady
matters
is.
worse. We must use science to know these things if we are to adapt to future climate change. That means we must expand our capacity to model, especially from the developing countries, who can come.
Okay, so she's Margaret Thatcher. Does anybody not know who she is? Raise your hands. Okay, who knows who she is? Can explain? Yeah.
She was one of like the prime ministers of like the UK, like back then.
One of the past ex-prime minister of UK, right? They call her the Iron Lady, and you can see from the way she talks why they call her that.
United Kingdom and contribute to this vital work. But as well as the science, we need to get the economics right. That means, first, we must have continued economic growth in order to generate the wealth required to pay for the protection of the environment. But it must be growth which doesn't plunder the planet today and leave our children to deal with the consequences tomorrow. And second, we must resist the simplistic tendency to blame modern multinational industry for the damage which is being done to the environment. Far from being the villains, it is on them that we rely to do the research and find the solutions. It's industry which will develop safe alternative chemicals for refrigerators and air conditioning. It's industry which will devise biodegradable plastics. It's industry which will find the means to treat pollutants and make nuclear waste safe. And many companies, as you know, already have massive research programs. The multinationals have to take the long view. There'll be no profit or satisfaction for anyone if pollution continues to destroy our planet. As people's consciousness of environmental needs rises, they're turning increasingly to ozone-friendly and other environmentally safe products. The market itself acts as a corrective.
Okay, with that I end my talk. Just to say that the word industry has many, many meanings. One of its meanings is actually just hard work. And with that, I will just end the talk that, you know, I want to encourage you to work hard because this is a field that requires that. Actually, every field lah.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, with that, maybe I can invite some questions from the floor. I thought that was a really fascinating talk. Yeah, I really enjoyed myself. Thanks. You all have no questions? You fully understood everything Chris said?
Because if you don't have a question.
Yeah, why not?
So who kills the cat? What kills the cat?
That was your question. So have you figured who killed the
It
cat?
is a question that you all need to answer.
Julia.
Girl, please.
I was gonna ask you that question, so I don't really.
Humans.
All of us? Why do you say humans? Maybe we can hear your thoughts. no wrong answer anyway.
I need a minute to gather my thoughts.
Okay, you gather your thoughts. You can change your answer after your thoughts, okay, if you want to. Anyone wants to try? What kills the cat? First, maybe we should investigate the verb. Huh? Did you notice what tense I use? It's a... Did I? Can we go back to... Yeah. Let's go back to the number one slide. Huh?
The new products sell, and those which caused environmental...
I think we are in YouTube. So how do I get out? Because my PowerPoint links are... Ah, yes, there. So note the tense of the verb kill. That's a clue, you see, what kills the cat. Do you want to share something?
Divergence.
Divergence kills the cat. How did it kill the cat? Just tire it out, isn't it? Just having to think of options after options, it can really kill you. You know, literally when the client asks you, can I have more options? I actually tell you that reaction when I had just now is real, okay? It's not, you see it looks real because it's real. I don't have to act it. It's like, yeah, okay.
Humans' curiosity kills the cat.
It's humans' curiosities that kill the cat. Yeah, that's a good one. Would you want to explain?
I kind of take it as like, because humans are the only one that can really think in a certain unique way, not seen in other species on this earth, and in turn, our own strive for the way that we strive for better things, the way that we strive for things unknown, it in turns is detrimental to our own home, which is the earth.
So it not only kills the cat, but everything else, you know. I mean, really, that could be true, right? If we, I mean, our curiosities have made us we are today, but we don't know what our continued curiosities may bring us. Thank you, Julia. Anyone want to attempt your own take at what kills the cat? Yeah.
I would like to say that the cat isn't dead yet, and indifference would kill the cat.
Oh, this answer is very close to what I have at heart, actually, because the cat just fainted, like, it didn't die. No, you're right, in the sense that, you know, indifference, doing nothing, may be the even more lethal than being curious, right? But when you're curious, you want to try to find out, you want to try to solve things, you may actually take actions towards, for example, reviving the cat or preventing them from getting killed. Anyone else? Yep.
So I think of the killing of cat is more like a sort of, the cat refers to like inner child in a sense. So I feel that lack of curiosity killed the inner child within us. So I think, like for as designers, right, if we don't sort of like try to think for ourselves, we just take exactly what the lecturer says, we just blindly follow, and then that's what will kill us basically. Even though we are not dead, but we are dead.
So the cat is a metaphor in this case. Your name, Brandon, is saying, right, for what you actually need for, let's say, doing design and so on. And if you are not curious, right, and then that child in you, that curiosity is killed, then you can't do your design work. Okay, that's an interesting thing as well, Brandon. So curiosity, actually this is not a cat, right? It's just a metaphor for something, okay? Yeah. So Anyone else thinks that cat is a metaphor, but maybe not a metaphor for inner child, but maybe a metaphor for something else? Anyone want to think that it could be something else?
I think it can be a metaphor for environment, that we kind of kill the environment every time a human is curious. We do all of these things, we make new landscape projects, which are not really good for the environment. And in the presentation, you also showed us that. So I think it's environment.
Thank you, yeah. So the cat could be a metaphor for environment, and you know, what we do can be quite damaging. Anyone else? But, so if we spend thoughts about how we do it, so that, you know, the question we then can ask, using the same curiosity in us, is how can we then do it differently, so that we can save the cat, for example, right? If that's the metaphor. Anyone else? Anyone else behind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe my take can be, maybe it's a bit like subjective, but maybe it can, maybe I'm saying this from maybe like a self-improvement like level, but maybe the cat actually refers to ourselves in a way, because at the end of the talk you mentioned that, you know, you firmly believe that hard work is actually essential, especially in this field or maybe in odd fields. So basically you summarize that hard work is essential for us to generate new ideas and all that. So maybe maybe in a way I say that the cat is actually ourselves, because at the end of the day, putting in hard work is actually like a conscious action. It's something that we consciously have to put in action into. It's not just something that, maybe it's not one of the things that we can just you know, go along the flow with. It's actually something that we have to maybe do extra things in certain something, like maybe we have to get extra consultations, maybe we need to stay late just to get more ideas. So maybe, you know, the cat does refer to ourselves, and maybe what kills the cat refers to, maybe in a way like invites us to self-reflect in a way, and just reflect on maybe what are some of the conscious actions we do that can potentially kill us, the cat.
Stop you from.
Yes.
Stop you from maybe your goals, reaching your potentials, for example. That's a good one. Okay, I think with that, maybe, do you have a question?
I do have a question actually. So, because in, say, interior design or architecture, a lot of times when we design, we deliberately give a form to something, a very deliberate form. And I really love this quote you said, that random is a bigger order. And in landscape design, obviously, you know, it's not 100% control, because after you plant the saplings, right, they will grow into maybe something else that you never imagined or that you cannot control. So how then, you know, in landscape architecture, do you design an identity for, let's just say if you do bird paradise, which has, really it is the landscape architecture that makes the identity. How do you actually, what's the process like, you know?
Okay.
To give an identity.
Yeah. Wanted to get you all to ask questions because I know hers will be very tough. Okay, first I'll talk about maybe identity and how I see it. Because as Singaporeans, right, we're very used to this question actually of like, you know, trying to find so-called our identity. But maybe also to kind of relate back to the last philosophers, the Lao Tzu's the way of thinking. Because the question of identity as a people, I'll come to identity in design after that, is about not just one person, right? Obviously, it's about all of us. So to him, culture is as little as the way we use words, as little as how we talk. Because how we talk influences the way we think influences our actions. Our actions influence the, you know, other people's actions and reactions. And then as a group, when we do the same thing, say the same thing. And that's why in the office, I tend to talk about the language of design quite a lot, because I feel that there's a need for a common language of design so that you can better understand each other in order to deliver your products. So as people start to say the same thing, think the same way, do the same thing, that is then what a culture becomes. So to me, an identity maybe, especially for landscape architecture, is less about the form given to it, but that the form is actually a manifestation of the experience we hope to achieve. So for us, or for me personally, identity is the collective experience. And so it is something more you sense rather than you see. Though, of course, sight is one of the 6 senses.
I have another question. So, like for example, in Bishan Park, how you convert the longkang into a pond, you know, and then in also Mayor House, I think, right? It's about rainwater harvesting and all that. There's actually a lot of science behind landscape architecture. So, which come first? The art or the science come first? Because if the client said, I want rainwater harvesting, then, you know, when you need to design such a system, that will dictate certain things, right? So I'm really curious, the art first or the science first?
So I'll answer this by saying that many people may not know this, but in the old days, science is not a very used word. The word that they used to describe science, do you want to guess what word is it? Anyone want to guess? Do you know what word do they use when they want to say science? In old writings, you will find this word used in a manner, actually, you read on, you clearly know they are talking about science, not whatever they say, whatever word they use. Any guess?
Logic.
Logic, right? Is it logic? Anyone want to guess a different word?
Physics?
No prize for getting it right.
Physics?
Physics? Math? Actually, the word is art. So there's no difference. Art refers to the way we think. And we can think like a scientist. We can think like an artist. And I think this really should be the last question, because not because of me not wanting to answer another one, but because of how I chose the topics. So there are 7 curiosities. There are many more. Many, many more. Scientific curiosity, artistic curiosity, religious, spiritual curiosities. You can describe a moment when you have a question, you can describe it by giving it a name like philosophic curiosity. And so that question, be it engineering, you know, Mr. Engineer is not there, I would have chosen someone to represent him. You know, it's in the way, and so in a strange way, landscape architect, I always say I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. Not only because I don't have a preferred style, even though actually my boss came to me one day and said, Chris, you have the most distinctive style. I was like, huh? Disappointed to hear that, right? But no, so art is the way we think. Science is one of them. Scientific curiosity is one of them. Artistic is, you know, it's just another one. And they are all valid. So back to that point that I said then, if there's nothing you remember, just remember this one thing. Just ID, is it convergence or divergence? And if that curiosity and that way of thinking is suitable for that phase, just use it. Doesn't matter, right? Is it analytical, trying to find out what's there, gathering inputs, right? Discovering things, relevant, use it. So I wouldn't say there's anything that comes first. It's almost like we are so greedy, we want everything, but we can't because we are humans and we have to do linearly. So the only way is to manage it, and to manage it well, even for yourself, even when you're not working in a team, is ask yourself, am I in divergent phase or in convergent? face. Because you will face that question and you will despair. Tomorrow is submission, I have nothing. Okay, divergence or convergence? Do I want to present a lot of possibilities or just one? Then you're good to go.
Thanks. So next time when you go to botanical gardens and you enjoyed it, which I always have, then you can say that you actually know the landscape architect who did that. So with that, we'll end the session. So a big round of hands for Chris Long.